Hello. I guess we need to start to keep on schedule. I'm Jim Book, and I'm exploring the question of how dynamic diagrammatic modeling of lived experience can be used as a tool in humanistic psychology. So what is a dynamic diagrammatic model? Well, this whole presentation will be a dynamic diagrammatic model of my research project. So you'll get the idea. And I'm still experimenting with different techniques, so you'll find some things you like and some that you don't. But first I want to start with a kind of a blending of a conceptual model with a lived experience model to create a dynamic diagrammatic model of the lived experience of disorganized self-perception. And this is extracted from a model I'm working on that's derived from Carl Rogers' 1947 article on the organization of personality. So Rogers noted that intervening between an environmental stimulus and the behavioral response within a personality is the complex process of perception. And within the perceptual field, he focused on the role of self-perception in the organization of personality. So let's look at the organization of self-perception of Jane, a graduate student who comes into therapy having a rather closed and rigid concept of self. When her experiences of herself align with her concept, it validates her concept of self. But when she has experiences that do not align, that perception is perceived as a threat and is pushed away into the shadows of conscious awareness, which still leaves behind a persistent tension, and she feels anxious and disorganized and perplexed with what's going on inside her. So we could call this our model of disorganized self-perception. And a more complete model will show the dynamics of this within the context of her whole personality. And the really interesting thing is within the context of client-centered psychotherapy to see how she reorganizes her self-perception. But you'll have to come back next year to see how that looks in the fully integrated model. So this example is a fragment of the model I'm working on that's derived from the Rogers article as a part of an exploratory case study that I'm working on to see how a written work in humanistic psychology can be translated into a model that aids in understanding. But what is the theoretical foundation for what I'm doing? Well, broadly speaking, my project falls under the area of semiotics, which is a study of sign systems and how they convey meaning. So when something, say a written project plan, is translated into a different sign system, that process is called intersemiotic translation or adaptation. And but when the translation is driven by a change from one sociological context to another, that process is called resemiotization. So I want to look at a couple of examples of resemiotization in humanistic psychology. Eric Dotson's YouTube channel, it provides insights and humor on a wide range of topics, but when viewed through this lens of resemiotization, he takes key insights and concepts that are found in source materials written by and for academic specialists, and then translates them into introductory videos that use multiple modes of conveying meaning. And his core message is holism, which means he communicates both a conceptual understanding and a felt sense understanding of the various dimensions of our lived experience. But most important to him is that it's relevant and accessible to a broad audience. And his YouTube channel provides a means for doing that. Another example comes from the Phenomenological Film Collective, founded by Dr. Nisha Gupta. She created the cinematic phenomenological research method with 6 steps for doing phenomenological research and translating it into evocative short films. And that 4th step is the resemiotization into cinematic language, which all comes directly from the participants' lived experiences. And the films inspire social activism, and creates deep empathy through a medium that can convey the felt sense of the lived experience to a broad audience. So the theoretical foundation for this exploratory case study is resemiotization. And now I'll briefly mention that I'm doing a cognitive autoethnographic analysis of my process of translation in order to create a model creation framework and also gain some insights into how cognitive models change. But right now I want to go into a semiotic analysis of that model that we just looked at to get some ideas about what kinds of modeling would be helpful to psychology as a human science. So this semiotic analysis will highlight how meaning is conveyed by the various modalities in the model. But first note my disclaimer that I put on each model, that a model highlights parts of a perspective to aid in understanding. It's not meant to completely represent reality. The parts of the model are introduced incrementally along with color highlighting and a narrative description to ease understanding of the model. And the relationships within the parts within the wholes contribute to the structure of the model and provide a conceptual context. And maintaining continuity in the transitions to different views helps to unify the model. Lived experiences, the processes of lived experiences are modeled through animation of the internal elements, the subjective internal elements. And metaphorical images are used to convey the felt sense of the lived experience. And finally, the models can help with deriving the general from the concrete. So imagine that I've created a diagram of 5 different case studies. The text of those would all be different because they're all based on individual lived experiences. But if a common diagrammatic pattern emerges from those models, then that might suggest a generalization. So, come back. And finally, for those of you who missed the traditional PowerPoint bullet points, I'll leave you with this concluding slide, which lists some of the sociological context that drives this project, what needs to be modeled in humanistic psychology, as far as I determined so far from this case study, and also some possible uses of this kind of modeling. So I'm interested in hearing any of your feedback on this. Thank you. So, any questions or comments? Yes?
Knowing me the way you do.
Yes, I do.
Could someone, as not quite tech savvy as myself, be able to use this?
Okay, well that's one of the things I want to work on. Right now, I'm doing it all in PowerPoint.
Right.
And part of my struggle has been learning how to work around certain things and stuff. And so part of that model creation framework that I'm talking about creating is going to be specific ways of doing this kind of thing.
Right.
So right now, no.
No.
But yes, that's the goal. The goal is to make it accessible to students and professors so they can create their own models. Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes.
It's marvelously creative and technologically exemplary. Just
Whoa.
really sweet to see a nice use. So I'm curious about the verb hide in your disclaimer. What do you? I'm curious about the verb hide. What do you imagine you might be hiding by this that might be revealed with another method?
Yeah, simply that when you're modeling, you're kind of showing a framework for viewing it through this framework. So it's hiding another way of viewing it. So you could create another model that views it in another way that would have been hidden if you hadn't done that. So that's another thing I want to do eventually is, let's see two different models, two different perspectives on the same phenomenon. And each one will hide something that the other one reveals.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. A minute. Any other questions?
Is this something you can foresee being used by like mental health practitioners as well, to kind of put things into a model form and use them in
Do you mean using it in clinical practice?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the interesting thing is that 10 years ago, this is about how I got interested in this, was I started diagramming my own experience, in part in my own therapy process, to try to understand, well, why is it that I always seem to get overwhelmed and then I get put back here and I can't expand in these different ways. And so I could see it, if it was easy enough to do, that either the therapist or the client themselves could kind of create a model of their subjective experience.
Okay.
But that's another level of making it easy to use. Yes.
Excellent work. Very interested in this idea of modeling and its relationship to human action and storytelling and that sort of thing. So I'm curious, so what do you see as the relationship between the models that you create and narratives that people tell through the models?
Okay. Yeah, one thing I didn't mention much about is that, the model, I was narrating the models as I was showing it, so that's another mode that's part of this. And I was unclear whether the narration should be the specific case that I'm describing or the general case. I was kind of using it as the general. But yeah, I think that's a very important part of it. It's a different dimension of it, but I have not explored that very much yet. So that's something I need to explore more. Are we? Okay, well, thank you again.